Hello, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries, the re-entry series. I'm Doreen Cumberford, the host.
And I'm Linda Mueller, the co-host.
Hi, everyone. Doreen here with Linda.
Hello, everyone.
This is a little bit of a fun popcorn repatriation trivia. In the next book that's coming out that I'm writing, it's about repatriation. And I thought, I better come up with some kind of a symptom guide so that how the heck do we know that these behaviors are, normal?
But we're keeping it light here, right? So there's symptoms, but they're things that might make everybody chuckle a little bit.
Exactly. Here's one of them. Do you ever get paralyzed by choices in stores?
Yes.
Yes.
Choked up, teary-eyed.
Yes, indeed. Do you ever experience a longing for home and then realize you are home? Yes. Have you ever missed the proximity and intimacy of friends who were family overseas?
Definitely.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is particularly for those of us who are very heart-centered. I miss the family.
Well, and I'll sometimes start to see them or think I see them like in a crowd or like on the distance. And then I'm like, oh, it's time to make a phone call. Because if I'm thinking that I actually see them in the proximity when I know they're nowhere neirby, then
yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting, Linda. That's good information from your psyche, huh?
Yeah, sure.
Do you find yourself ever feeling foreign and being the observer in your groups?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
We're nodding. Do you find yourself longing to fit in and belong back home? Definitely. I've had that. Do you find yourself looking for ways into a group? Like, oh, if I do this, I'll feel part of it. Or if I squeeze myself into a pretzel, I'll feel better.
That's the whole fitting in versus belonging, right?
Yes.
When you're changing to fit into a group versus finding people where they accept you for who you are and where you've been.
Yes. So some of these are pretty deep, actually, and some of them are more superficial. Here's some. Do you find yourself turning your nose up at the local cuisine?
You mean that everything comes with French fries, even if it's a fine steak? No, not me.
Yes, exactly. And do you find yourself haunting the aisles of exotic supermarkets looking longingly for familiar ingredients that are nowhere to be found?
Definitely.
Yeah, you're still cooking internationally, right?
I am. And there are times when I have to go to 3 grocery stores in order to complete a meal.
That's where my husband is now. He's on his bicycle going to get cream for pavlova.
Oh, nice. Well, and I don't want to mislead anyone. I'm not a gourmet chef, but I do have a few things that I like to make that are sort of my comfort foods from different places I've lived. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Are you always dreaming of your next adventure abroad?
I am now. I have to say, COVID kind of squashed that for a little while, but now I'm back. We just took our first international trip post-pandemic, and now I'm back on it.
There you go. I love it. Do people accuse you of having a full passport of overseas places, but you're ignorant of the local places? Yes, I'm afraid so.
But that's actually what we've been doing since the pandemic is we've actually been exploring the US, and it's been really fun because there's so many places we hadn't been.
Yes, that was my experience also. Yeah, especially doing pet sitting because we were doing it. We had done it in 10 different countries. And so during COVID, we went, oh, well, let's try it in the US.
But, on the flip side of that, also, I'll say I sometimes feel like I'm the foreigner here because I'm not from Chicago, where we're living right now. And so people will mention suburbs, and I kind of get this look on my face, like I have no idea, not being from here and living in the city of Chicago. I just don't know the surrounding area very well.
Definitely. Do you find yourself yearning to hear a different but a familiar language? I heard some Arabic this morning on TV. It was very comforting. I didn't understand a word, but it was comforting.
Well, and I'll say I actually will watch some TV shows now that are maybe not really my thing, but because they're filmed in London or they're filmed in Tokyo, and I'm enjoying hearing the language. I'll just keep watching.
Yes, or just watching the familiar places, right?
Right.
Are you the person who accidentally slips into a foreign language in the middle of a sentence?
I'm guilty of it within my family, for sure.
I think growing up in Scotland and living in the UK and with France so nearby, there was an assumption that everybody spoke a level of French. I always felt like French was my sort of second language, and it's in our words and our food and everything is so related. So I do that more in certain places where I have that association. But now I see myself doing that now that I live in Mexico. I see that same kind of behavior using the Spanish language because it's comforting in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Are you aware of the code switching going on in your brain where you're constantly evaluating little tiny invisible cultural nuances?
Interesting. I don't think I am doing that really. I mean, one thing with the United States is that it's such a big country that even when I go to a different region, I feel like maybe that's when I'm doing it more so than on a daily basis in Chicago.
Yes.
I notice when I go back to the place where I spent the bulk of my childhood outside of Philadelphia, I'm constantly noticing how people do things and say things differently.
Yes. Yeah. Do you find yourself pining to enjoy certain music from your time abroad?
Probably not for me quite as much.
I notice that when I hear certain African rhythms, that takes me back to, 4 decades ago almost in Cameroon, West Africa. And what did we do there? We went to discotheques every night, and it was a lot of dancing, and there was a lot of lights. I remember that in the dark, and it was very, very black, very, very dark, and pretty primitive. I do have associations like that. Do you find yourself hankering for familiar tastes and smells that are no longer available to you?
That's a good one. Probably not as much as kind of having something and saying like, oh, this brings me back. So, for example, they opened an okonomiyaki restaurant in Chicago recently, and we went, and that took me, because that's not on typical restaurant menus. And so we hightailed it there with some friends who spent some time in Tokyo as well. And we really, it took me back.
Yeah. I love those restaurants. Those were really fun. Do you frequently mix up behaviors and find yourself bowing or nodding no or shaking your head for yes?
Yeah, it's funny.
I do when I'm home in Mexico, because sometimes I'm aware that I'm in a cultural space, like I'm in space, and I don't really understand all the nuances of everything that's going on. And that's when I kind of, bow instead of shake hands, or shake hands instead of bow, or nodding, or yeah, and they're very, very, very great huggers. I'm finding the Mexicans, they're and very definite and very strong handshakes in many cases. So sometimes it just throws me off, and I know when I'm thrown off a little bit that's when I not misbehave, but I do misbehave culturally.
One thing that you're bringing up for me is when we first moved to Chicago from Japan many years ago, I would find myself downtown standing and waiting for the walk sign to change at the light. Everybody else would just be going, like if they thought it was safe to cross, that they didn't really care. And I remember one time standing there thinking, oh, you can take the girl out of Japan, but you can't take the Japan out of the girl, because I was not about to cross the street until the light changed and it said I could walk.
Yes. Do you find yourself longing for airports and the smell of jet fuel?
Airports for sure.
Do you find yourself in conversation reaching for and then embracing two opposing ideas at the same time? I think that what I'm trying to say is, you find yourself fighting for an idea and then talking yourself into the opposite and deciding they're both okay?
I think that's just part of my personality. It's probably how I'm able to kind of like float around.
Yeah, and I do think that after we've been expats, that exposes us more to this end, and so sometimes there is a bit of comfort, a little more comfort with that. Are you guilty of operating on the timing of your previous location, showing up late or early for events?
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Or thinking twice. Wait, if it says I'm supposed to be there at 6, does it really mean 7 or 8?
Yes, and what does Mexican time mean? Because my husband will still be like, "Oh, we've got to be there right on time." And I know that many of the social events we have in San Miguel are actually start right on time, but it's because there's a lot of expats. So I'm like, so how expat oriented is this? Is this run by Mexicans or is it run by an expat? I'm always trying to figure that out when I'm there. And when I'm back home in the States, I'm always like, well, I'm not sure what thinking I'm in. I'm not sure if I'm in the away thinking or the home thinking.
Right, right.
Are you living in a house filled to overflowing with articles from your past that you have no idea why you now own them?
I've curated mine, but yes, for sure.
Yes. I think many of these can be applied to repatriation, and that's one of them I've gone through. Do you find yourself in nostalgia overload?
At times, for sure.
Yes. And do you find yourself mentally converting currencies in your head when purchasing something?
That's a good question. Maybe when I first returned. I don't know. Do you?
I had to do it yesterday. I was buying a gift for my daughter. I hope she doesn't hear this. In this particular town, they have a Christmas store and has certain kind of ornaments that we could buy in the Middle East. And so I bought a couple for her.
Oh, nice.
And we were discussing how much they cost. And my husband was saying, well, this is so many dirhams, not dirhams, so many, I can't remember the currency. And I said, oh, is it? And so we were discussing how we had an absolute definite idea of what that should cost on the other side of the world. And it was pretty similar to here.
Well, I think one thing related to that is that we're sort of stuck in what an exchange rate should be in Tokyo, for example, because we lived there twice. And some friends of ours just went there and they said the exchange rate is so much more. They're American also in our favor. And so it's like everything was on sale. They felt like that as they were traveling.
Yes. Do you long for the ability to shut down conversations that are happening around you in your native language?
Sort of.
Sometimes.
Are you talking about the overload of like actually being able to understand everything around you?
Yes. So just the ability to shut down the noise, really. And do your friends wonder when you'll stop comparing home with where you were? Uh-oh. Do you find yourself yearning for something that you can't quite define? And yet, when you think about it, it really feels like a previous home. That happens to me. Are you wistful for a different sense of freedom? Well, I think that relates more, that's more an a USA-centric question, because freedom here means something very different from freedom in other countries, I think. Do you miss traveling with the purpose of arriving home, quote unquote, home? I still miss arriving back from our repatriations to Saudi, because for some reason we had this habit of arriving back home to our house with the door closed, and we had a great big Arabic door hanging on the wall outside, and we had to send our daughter up that. She had to climb it and open her bedroom window. So we had to break into our own house every time we came home. And that became like almost a thing we did. And I miss that.
Yeah. I did really enjoy living between two worlds, to be honest.
Yes.
I thought it was, when we lived in Japan the first 2 times, we did not have a home base in the US. So our home leaves were staying in hotels. And so it felt like a short, I won't call it a vacation. Yeah. So getting back to Tokyo, where we actually had our own space, was amazing. Yeah. And then the other 2 countries we lived in, we had a place in the US. So it was really nice to float between the 2 of them. So I do miss that at times.
Yes. Do you yearn for the familiarity of cross-cultural conversations with people that you've known overseas? Definitely. I miss the Saudi sense of humor. Do you frequently long to shut your current life out in the hopes that you can somehow go home to your previously foreign life? Not so much now. It's been a very long time, but when I talk to people in Saudi, or I talk to people in Japan, or even back in the UK, I do get that sense.
I get it when I'm getting off the plane. It's Japan more than the other countries because we lived there almost 7 years, but we'll be getting off the airplane and walking through the terminal, and it'll, I just feel like the word Tadaima comes to my mind. Like I do, which means welcome home.
Yes.
Or home. And I really feel like that is like the home in my heart.
Yes.
So it's been such a long time since we've lived there, but still when we go back on vacation, we just sort of like stay in our old neighborhood and walk around and pretend we still live there.
Nice. That's lovely.
It's really comforting.
Yes. Yeah. So this is all to say that if you find yourself experiencing, I would say 3 to 5 or more of these symptoms, then I believe that you're really experiencing no more and no less than a perfectly normal and natural repatriation. And even although something is normal, it doesn't make it easier to manage. It doesn't make it necessarily easier to live through. But living through this period is absolutely necessary. In fact, sewing these bits of life into your experience is so necessary in order to help you build your next grand adventure, wherever it may be.
Love it. That was a really fun list. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.